Happy holidays, Game of Thrones fans. I hope you're all able to find some time to be with friends and family, eat some good food, and maybe sit by the fire and watch a good movie or show. Today, let's talk about an age-old holiday topic, eugenics, and how Bloodraven might have manipulated the Targaryen gene pool to fulfill everyone's favorite doomsday prophecy. In the Game of Thrones books, the upcoming War for the Dawn between the living and the dead will be the perfect culmination of over 5 novels of setup. We know that prophecy is deeply involved somehow with the Long Night, because characters like Melisandre and Haldon Halfmaester and Rhaegar all have their candidates for a reincarnation of Azor Ahai, or the prince that was promised. If this magical hero, or villain depending on who you ask,
Hasn't it ever bothered you that Azor Ahai had to stab his wife to save the world? If so, good. It bothered me too the first time I heard the myth.
really was born again, and will have something to do with defeating the others, there's actually a good chance that Bloodraven made it possible. It's sort of a meme in the A Song of Ice and Fire community that when in doubt about some mysterious event, just blame Bloodraven. That's because Bloodraven, or Brynden Rivers, is one of George R.R. Martin's most fascinating characters. He was born a bastard, legitimized by a tyrant, hand of the king to a forgettable weirdo, was a sorceress, incestuous kinslayer, and possibly a genetic manipulator. This video will be told in 3 parts: Bloodraven's origins, his time spent as Hand of the King, and how his actions, along with some of his family members, culminated in the playing out of Aegon's Prince That Was Promised prophecy. Legal disclaimer: I do not condone or promote the concept of eugenics in real life, which is a negative practice that reinforces harmful stereotypes for the sake of racial superiority. It's merely fun to think about a weird medieval albino kid being super into race science for the sake of his ancestors' prophecy. Okay, back to the video. This all begins in the year 175 AC, when Brynden Rivers was born. Well, actually, it begins like 2 centuries earlier, but we'll get there. Brynden was the 13th child of King Aegon the IV Targaryen, the Unworthy. If you watched my latest Targaryen family tree video, you'll remember that Aegon IV had kids with 7 different women, and only one was his wife. One of those women was Melissa Blackwood, who became the king's 6th mistress in 172 AC, after the previous lady, Barbara Bracken, was sent back to Stonehenge with their bastard, Aegor. The Brackens and Blackwoods have hated each other for eternity, so it was a big deal when Melissa Blackwood took Barbara Bracken's place as Aegon's mistress. Aegon grew to love Melissa so much that he gave a pair of hills called the Teats to House Blackwood, after previously having given it to the Brackens. Aegon was a simple man, and he had nicknamed the hills Barba's Teats when he initially gave them to the Brackens. But when he learned that Barba insulted the size of Melissa Blackwood's breasts, he re-nicknamed the hills to Missy's Teats, and gave them to the Blackwoods of Raventree Hall. So that's how boobs can factor into the realm of geopolitics. Melissa Blackwood was Aegon's mistress for 5 years, during which time she was very busy giving birth to 3 bastards, 2 daughters named Maya and Gwenys, and then a boy named Brynden. Melissa was kind and generous and beloved by everyone, including Aegon's brother, Aemon the Dragonknight, their sister, Queen Naerys, and Naerys and Aegon's son, Daeron. Well, Aemon, Naerys, and Daeron were all normal, well-adjusted people, so it makes sense why they liked Melissa. Aegon was a spiteful, lustful ingrate, so he dismissed Melissa from court and brought in another Bracken, Lady Bethany, to replace her. In 178 AC, when Brynden was 3, Aegon's newest mistress, sweet Serene of Lys, died giving birth to a girl named Shiera, the Star of the Sea. As young bastard children at court, Brynden and Aegor Rivers formed a hateful rivalry over their love of their sister, Shiera Seastar, and the enmities of their mothers' families, the Blackwoods and the Brackens. Shiera liked Brynden, not Aegor, even though Aegor was a really nice guy. You see, this is how incels are made. Aegor eventually became known as Bittersteel for obvious reasons. Brynden was born with a red wine-stained birthmark on his right cheek, which was shaped like a raven, so Brynden became known as Bloodraven. Bloodraven was also an albino, with milk-white skin, white hair, and red eyes, not the customary Valyrian purple eyes. His half-sister Shiera also had a mysterious, exotic look. She was considered a great beauty, but had one dark blue eye and one bright green eye, and they were large and full of mischief. In 184 AC, as King Aegon lay dying, Bloodraven was 9 years old, and he, Shiera, and all of Aegon's other bastards became legitimized. Aegon the Unworthy did this because he liked his bastard son, Daemon Blackfyre, more than his true son, Daeron. But it also meant that Bloodraven became fifth in line to the throne. Not that that really mattered, it's just interesting. Aegon gave Daemon the ancestral blade of the ruler of the Iron Throne, Blackfyre, which is why he took that name for himself and his future family. Perhaps as a response to Aegon giving his bastard son the Sword of Kings, Bloodraven took Dark Sister, the sibling sword to Blackfyre, wielded by the likes of Visenya the Conqueror, Balon the Brave, and the Rogue Prince before him. In 196 AC, 12 years after Aegon IV's death, Bloodraven's elder half-brother, Daemon Blackfyre, finally began his rebellion against King Daeron II, Aegon the Unworthy's true-born son with Naerys. The three of them grew up in the same court of the Red Keep, and Bloodraven had to choose a side. Would he join his fellow legitimized bastard, Daemon, the king who bore the sword? Or would he remain loyal to King Daeron in King's Landing? Well, Bittersteel joined up with Daemon Blackfyre about as quickly as he could, and King's Landing had Shiera Seastar in it, so the choice was obvious for Bloodraven. At the age of 21, at the climactic Battle of the Red Grass Field, Bloodraven met both Daemon Blackfyre and Bittersteel amidst the fighting. Bloodraven had a group of personal guards called the Raven's Teeth, who he outfitted with white weirwood longbows. He commanded them to rain arrows down on the Blackfyre host. First, they slew Daemon's son and heir, Aegon. Then Daemon went to his son's dying body, where Bloodraven loosed 7 arrows into him. Finally, Daemon's younger son, Aemon, picked up his father's sword, Blackfyre. Bloodraven killed him as well. As their 3 leaders died in battle, the Blackfyre army began a retreat. That is until Bittersteel took charge and led the host right back to the Targaryens. Bittersteel and Bloodraven fought a bloody duel amidst the clashing armies. Aegor slashed out Bryndon's left eye, but Bloodraven eventually got the upper hand with Dark Sister, his Valyrian steel sword, and caused Bittersteel and the Blackfyre army to retreat for good. 10,000 men, including Daemon Blackfyre and 2 of his sons, died on the Red Grass Field. Blackfyre supporters said it was the Kinslayer who turned the tide with a white arrow and a black spell. For the rest of his life, Bloodraven wore the burden of being labeled a Kinslayer. Bloodraven hated the Blackfyres, not because they were some personal insult to his Targaryen legitimacy, because they weren't and he wasn't. Bloodraven facilitated order through direct displays of power, which earned him a reputation throughout the realm as a dark sorcerer and villain inside the Red Keep. He was a reviled Kinslayer, like Jaime Lannister is a reviled Kingslayer, 2 ironic monikers for the best deeds either of them did. Jaime killed a mad tyrant, and Bloodraven killed war-hungry belligerents who tried to destabilize the realm. Don't feel too sorry for Bloodraven yet, though. In 209 AC, 13 years after the Red Grass Field, the Great Spring Sickness fell over Westeros. The plague killed King Daeron II and his 2 grandsons and heirs, Valar and Rhaegarys. Daeron's second son, Aerys, ascended the throne, and Bloodraven became his nephew's Hand of the King and Master of Whisperers. This is a time when a lot of Targaryens were dying, and the known Kinslayer and suspected sorcerer, Bloodraven, is theorized to be the culprit. But he had good intentions, I swear. What are a few family members' lives against the survival of humanity?
Everything.
The best way to describe Bloodraven's thought process is the ends justify the means. He doesn't care if he has to become a Kinslayer if it means ending the war with the Blackfyres, for example. So let's take a brief interlude and look back at Bloodraven's ancestor, Aegon the Conqueror, who lived about 150 years before Bryndon's birth. As we all know by now, ever since the premiere of House of the Dragon and confirmation by George R.R. Martin, Aegon Targaryen had a prophetic dragon dream about the coming threat in the north, the Long Night 2.0. In House of the Dragon, Aegon believes that from his blood will come the prince that was promised, and he must unite the realm against the cold, dark evil up north.
From my blood come the prince that was promised, and his will be the song of ice and fire.
Those specifics weren't confirmed by George. He just confirmed the existence of Aegon's dream about the others. But it's pretty reasonable to assume that Aegon, and then Jaehaerys, Viserys, and others after them, believed that a Targaryen must be on the throne to deal with the others. This prophecy may have been lost in the shuffle in the decades after the Dance of the Dragons, with lots of political turmoil and shifting of kings and heirs. But by the time of Aerys I's reign, which began in 209 AC, 78 years after the dance ended, it seems the prophecy was re-entering the Targaryen zeitgeist. We learn in the Dunk and Egg stories that Aerys read about dragons returning in a prophecy, potentially the Prince That Was Promised prophecy that Aegon the Conqueror wrote down. At this point of Aerys' reign, Maester Aemon and his little brother Egg were young men, and Bloodraven was about 35. These three Targaryens, Aerys, Aemon, and Egg, all became enamored with this prophecy, and it's quite possible that Bloodraven did as well. Let's skip back to 233 AC. King Aerys I has died, and King Mycor I, the father of Aemon and Egg, has been ruling for 12 years. And wouldn't you know it, Mycor dies as well, getting crushed by a rock in battle. As I said, a lot of Targaryens have been dying, and the succession is getting murky. Let's take a look at the family tree. Daeron II, Bloodraven's older half-brother, had 4 kids. Baelor Breakspear was the eldest son and heir, and he died defending Sir Duncan the Tall in a trial of 7. He had 2 sons, Valar and Baterys, who both died with King Daeron during the Great Spring Sickness of 209 AC. So Aerys I became king, but he strangely had no kids, and never had any kids during his 12-year-long reign. He also had a younger brother, Rhaegar, who was very, very insane. He died choking on pie, and both of his children, Aelor and Aelora, died as well. There was some vague, unnatural disaster that Aelor caused, which killed Aelor, and later on Aelora killed herself. So Mycor ascended the throne, and he had 6 kids, 4 of them being sons and heirs. The eldest was Daeron the Drunken, who had a daughter, Rhaella, and died of an STD. The second eldest was Aerion Brightflame, who did have a son, Maegor, but died drinking wildfire because he wanted to become a dragon. Then there was Aemon, who chose to study at the Citadel, assuming that he was so far down in the succession that he would never need to become king. Even once Daeron and Baelor and Valar and Baterys and Aerys and Rhaegal and Aelor and Aegon and Mycor all died, Aemon refused the throne. So the youngest son of Mycor, Aegon, or Egg, was chosen as king by the Great Council of 233 AC. That's 9 male heirs older than Egg who had to die between 209 and 233 AC before he could become king. During that entire span of time, Bloodraven was Hand of the King, and ruled the realm for most of that time as well in Aerys' stead, who was a pretty hands-off monarch. Now, I'm not saying that Bloodraven used sorcery and schemes to ensure all these men died so that Egg could become king. But I'm also not saying that. King Daeron and Baelor's sons, Valar and Baterys, died of the Great Spring Sickness. That was a plague that killed thousands, so we probably can't pin that on Bloodraven. Baelor Breakspear dies in a trial of 7 defending Sir Duncan the Tall. It's revealed that it was his brother Mycor who accidentally dealt the killing blow to Baelor, but Mycor claims he doesn't remember striking Baelor in his head. Maybe Bloodraven was involved with this, and skin changed into Mycor in order to kill Baelor. This would be shockingly evil, as we learn in the A Dance with Dragons prologue that skin changing into another human's mind is one of the most vile acts a Greenseer can commit. I wouldn't necessarily put that past Bloodraven. The whole point of this video is that he's a pretty messed up guy, but Baelor probably just died by accident. Remember, George R.R. Martin's world is still random and ironic, so a lot of these deaths would happen with or without Bloodraven. A beloved prince like Baelor, who would have been a kind and fierce king, gets killed defending a lowborn hedge knight by his own brother's accidental hammer blow. That's just classic George R.R. Martin writing. Both Aerion and Rhaegal were insane. Rhaegal died choking on pie, apparently, which means there's lots of ways Bloodraven could have killed him. Maybe he poisoned the pie, or poisoned Rhaegal, or used some sorcery to close his throat, or just got him killed in some other way and put a fork in his hand and a pie on the table to make the crime scene more explicable. Aerion died drinking wildfire because he thought it would turn him into a dragon. Surely he was insane enough to do this on his own, given what we know about his cruel nature in the Hedge Knight. But it's also possible that Bloodraven the Greenseer got inside Aerion's dreams and told him to drink wildfire and become a dragon. Bloodraven does do this exact thing with Bran Stark, entering Bran's dreams and telling him to find him beyond the wall. Then there's Rhaegal's kids. All we know is that Aelora caused some sorcerous mishap that killed Aelor, which just has Bloodraven and Shiera written all over it. Daeron the Drunken was a known alcoholic and philanderer, so dying from an STD isn't hard to believe for him. As far as King Aerys I himself goes, that's interesting. Bloodraven was his hand, and we know that Aerys liked to read prophecies. It's very likely that Aerys knew about the prince that was promised, and knew it would not be born of his line. So he purposely never had children during his reign, during which time Aeg was growing up and got married to Betha Blackwood. Aegon and Betha were married in 220 AC, when Aeg was 20, and just a year later, in 221, Aerys died. Mycah died in 233, so Bloodraven had 12 years during Mycah's reign to ensure that Aerion and Daeron died, and Aemon was a maester, so that Aeg could become king. All I'm saying is that it's incredibly convenient for the one Targaryen who is sane, strong, kind, and not a maester is the one to carry on the Targaryen royal line. And he did it with Betha Blackwood. Recall that Bloodraven's mother was Melissa Blackwood, a mistress of Aegon IV in 175 AC. The Blackwoods are a house in the Riverlands who have strong ties to the old gods, just like the Starks. They even keep a great weirwood at Raventree Hall. Bloodraven uses a weirwood longbow, and he himself is sort of a physical embodiment of a weirwood tree. He's an albino, so his skin is white, and his one eye is red, as was his birthmark. Bloodraven was said to be a sorcerer, and maybe that's true. But Brendan Rivers was really a green seer, likely having obtained that power through his first men blood from House Blackwood. As most fans know, the three-eyed raven, who teaches Bran Stark in the cave beyond the wall, is Bloodraven, using the power of the weirwood to keep his Crypt Keeper body alive. At the current point of A Song of Ice and Fire, he's 125 years young. At that great council in 233 AC, the one Bloodraven assembled, and where Aeg was chosen as king, Bloodraven used that opportunity to kill another Blackfyre, because killing Blackfyres was just his favorite. Bloodraven invited Aenys Blackfyre, a son of Daemon Blackfyre, to come to King's Landing from Essos to be considered by the council. But as soon as he showed up, Bloodraven arrested him and beheaded him. When Aeg was chosen and became King Aegon V, his first act as king was to send Bloodraven to the Night's Watch. Aegon probably didn't know about Bloodraven's plan to ensure the birth of Azor Ahai through Aegon's line with Betha Blackwood, and sending him to the wall wasn't out of character for Aeg, who was capable of being stern, and didn't have a great relationship with his great-uncle Bloodraven anyway. As for Bloodraven, his work in the capital was done, and it was time for his work in the north to begin. As Hand of the King for over a decade, all the male heirs who came before Aeg in the succession were killed. Baelor Breakspear and his kids, Daeron the Drunken, Aerion Brightflame, Rhaegal and his kids. Bloodraven very likely had something to do with a lot of these deaths, and some deaths would have happened anyway. Remember, the ends justify Bloodraven's means. He does have a reason for wanting Aeg to be king in the end. Bloodraven was a greenseer and old gods enjoyer, as well as a High Valyrian prophecy enjoyer. This is where Aegon's dream comes back into play. Aemon and Aeg would often talk about their family's lore, and dragons returning, and as Bloodraven was so close to Aerys I during his reign, he likely knew about the prophecies Aerys I was getting into. Bloodraven may have come to the realization that it was up to him to ensure the birth of the prophesied Targaryen who would one day be Azor Ahai reborn, the prince that was promised. Those are Bloodraven's ends. The means were to ensure Aegon V ascended the throne no matter the cost. So Bloodraven hated the Blackfyre pretenders, since he knew the prince that was promised would not be born of their line. It would be born of Aegon's, whose children with Betha Blackwood would carry first men blood, and the potential for green sight just like Bloodraven himself had. So Bloodraven committed atrocities like kinslaying and perhaps even skin-changing another human to ensure a clear path of Aegon's ascension. In A Song of Ice and Fire, there are times when characters must forfeit their morality, if they had any to begin with, in order to achieve their ends. Another example of this sense of false righteousness is Melisandre, who makes blood sacrifices of R'hllor deniers and those with king's blood. She may end up burning Shireen Baratheon alive as a sacrifice to achieve her ends, which, like Bloodraven, are to ensure the coming of Azor Ahai. She believes it to be Stannis, but thanks to Bloodraven's genetic tampering, it's more likely to be Jon Snow. And Bloodraven was right in the end. Aeg was succeeded by his son Jaehaerys, who was half Blackwood. Then Jaehaerys did some classic incest with his sister Shaera, so their kids, Aerys and Rhaella, kept that Blackwood DNA. Jaehaerys was adamant that Aerys and Rhaella be married to each other as well, since a witch told him that the prince that was promised would be born of his line, which was also Aegon V's line, and Aegon the Conqueror's line. And of course, Aerys and Rhaella had Daenerys, a potential Azor Ahai candidate who contains some First Men Old Gods DNA from Betha Blackwood. Jon Snow has even more First Men DNA, both from Betha Blackwood through Rhaegar, and a ton of it through his mother, Lyanna Stark. Obviously, this assumes R plus L equals J, which has been essentially confirmed by George R.R. Martin. This insistence that the prince that was promised must be born with both Valyrian and First Men blood is consistent ever since the rise of Bloodraven, about a century before Jon and Dany's births. Let's talk about the Starks then. The specifics of Aegon's dream are unknown, but there is no doubt that it convinced him to align his family with the Starks in the north. After all, it was in the Starks' kingdom of the north that the threat of Aegon's dream would break out. When Aegon was fully in the midst of his conquest, King Torrhen Stark marched south with 30,000 Northmen to confront these foreign invaders. When Torrhen crossed the Neck and learned of the Field of Fire, where Aegon and his sisters burned the heck out of the army of Kings Gardner and Lannister, the largest combined army Westeros had ever seen, that stopped Torrhen in his tracks. We learn in Fire and Blood that Torrhen Stark never attacked Aegon Targaryen, as he was likely afraid of being cooked by the three dragons. Torrhen sent his brother, Brandon Snow, as well as some maesters, to negotiate and talk with Aegon. The next morning, Torrhen met with Aegon himself, knelt, and gave up the Crown of Winter. Many fans believe that Aegon told Torrhen Stark about his dream, told him why it was so important for Westeros to be united, with a Targaryen Dragonlord in the south and a Stark of Winterfell as Warden of the North. Aegon may have believed the Starks had an important role to play in the coming of the prince that was promised and the War for the Dawn. This Targaryen-Stark friendship persisted into the Dance of the Dragons. I'm going to spoil a plot point for House of the Dragon Season 2 right now, so skip forward to this timestamp if you don't want to hear it. Early in Season 2, Jaehaerys Velaryon, Rhaenyra Targaryen's son, will travel to Winterfell and meet Lord Cregan Stark. There, they will reach an accord, the Pact of Ice and Fire. In this pact, Cregan Stark agrees to support Rhaenyra's cause in the dance, and Jaehaerys agrees that as Rhaenyra's heir and the future king of Westeros, his firstborn daughter will marry Cregan Stark's heir, a baby named Rickon. This marriage alliance would infuse the line of House Stark with Targaryen blood, but it never happened. Jaehaerys died a little while later, and a Targaryen never wed a Stark. In House of the Dragon, Rhaenyra is really into Aegon's dream, and she might have told Jace about it, since he's her heir, just like Viserys told Rhaenyra when she became his heir. I wouldn't be shocked at all if in Season 2, Jace mentions Aegon's dream to Cregan, and the two decide to continue this dragon and wolf friendship. This simply supports the idea that the Targaryens valued the Starks, and Bloodraven may have still wanted to ensure that First Men and High Valyrian DNA got into the royal line somehow. So, he paved the way for Aeg to become king, and the future of House Targaryen carried Blackwood DNA. Then, Rhaegar, who is into the same prophecies that Aemon and Aeg and Bloodraven and Aerys were into, chose Lyanna Stark as the mother for his prophecy baby, who he believed would be the prince that was promised, a hero born of both Dragonlord and Northern First Men DNA. It's also very likely Bloodraven shared this interest in Targaryen genetic manipulation with those aforementioned Targaryens, who were super into prophecy, Aeg and Maester Aemon. Aeg becomes obsessed with hatching dragons as a method of bringing power back to his family. With dragons, the threat of Aegon's dream would be more easily confronted. If we assume that Aeg was clued in on Aegon's prophecy, it was his job to bring dragon magic back to his family, after Bloodraven, Aerys, and Aemon did their part of ensuring Aeg's ascension, abstaining from complicating things by having heirs, and by being a maester, respectively. Of course, Aeg and several members of House Targaryen die during his dragon egg hatching attempt at Summerhall, where it just so happens Rhaegar was born as the castle was burning. Maester Aemon went to the Night's Watch with Bloodraven to become their maester. Bloodraven was the ranger from 233 AC until 252 AC, when he disappeared and became a tree wizard. Part of Aeg must have known Bloodraven had a part to play up north to gather intel about the dark northern threat, since Aeg let Bloodraven take the Valyrian steel sword Dark Sister with him. Dark Sister is probably still with Bloodraven up north, and we know that Valyrian steel can kill White Walkers. Will Bran discover this and give the sword to Jon Snow when they reunite? It would be awfully poetic for Jon to use an ancestral sword from his Targaryen family that was also used by the man who was hellbent on ensuring Jon could even be born in the first place. That's also where Rhaegar comes in. Rhaegar was born in 259 AC, long after Bloodraven left King's Landing. But Rhaegar was very close with Maester Aemon, keeping constant contact with him via Raven, or perhaps even visits to the Wall. Both Aemon and Rhaegar shared an interest in the deeper mysteries and lore of their family and of the world. Barristan Selmy tells Daenerys that one day Rhaegar found something in his scrolls that changed him. He realized that he must become a warrior. He must have discovered Aegon's prophecy, just like Aemon, Aeg, Bloodraven, and Aerys I did. Rhaegar first believed himself to be the prince that was promised, but became convinced later on that the prince that was promised would rather be born of his line. In A Feast for Crows, Aemon talks about his and Rhaegar's misinterpretation of prophecy, and how Aemon now believes Rhaegar was wrong. His son wouldn't be the prince that was promised, but rather his sister, Daenerys, was the one. Of course, Aemon may not know that his pupil, Jon Snow, is also a prince that was promised candidate, born of both Stark and Targaryen blood. Bloodraven's initial goal, if this theory is correct, was to infuse the Targaryen line with First Men Greenseer DNA like he himself had. This is achieved to a certain extent with Daenerys, who brought the power of dragons back to her family after so many had tried before her and failed. Bloodraven also achieves this to a much higher degree with Jon Snow, who is a warg in the books, often entering the mind of his wolf, Ghost, and who is also almost certainly a Targaryen, who may end up bonding with one of Dany's dragons, making Jon the ultimate warg dragonlord of Bloodraven's wet dreams. Maester Aemon might have even told Rhaegar about the importance of First Men blood to the prophecy, which is why Rhaegar chose Lyanna Stark to have his prophecy baby with, Jon Snow. Bloodraven has been the hardest working man in the Seven Kingdoms for the better part of a century. He was born an albino bastard of the worst king in his family's history. He grew to love his mystifying and potentially sorcerous sister, Shiera, the Star of the Sea. Together at court in King's Landing, they read about prophecies in old texts and scrolls, likely uncovering Aegon's prophecy that inspired the conquest and the union of dragon and wolf. So Bloodraven set himself to work to ensure the birth of this prophesied hero that he'd been reading about. Some members of his family, like King Aerys I, Maester Aemon, and Aeg, all shared this interest in their family's destined legacy. But Bloodraven went to further lengths than anyone else. King Daeron's son and heir, Baelor Breakspear, despite being a great man, was not going to produce the prince that was promised. Neither would Aerys, who may have understood this and intentionally did not have offspring so as to simplify the succession. Rhaegal and his kids were no good either, and neither were the elder sons of Mycor. Bloodraven came to realize around 220 AC, after some of the aforementioned Targaryens had died by his hand or not, that Aeg's line would be the one to produce the prince that was promised, thanks to his genetic mingling with Betha Blackwood. So Bloodraven took care of those other male heirs in order to result in a genetically manipulated Targaryen royal line, one that Bloodraven likely committed atrocities to ensure, but one that may very well have produced Azor Ahai reborn. The devil works hard, but Bloodraven works harder, and eviler. I hope this video wasn't too pro-Bloodraven. Even if this theory is true in any way, and he did ultimately cause a good thing in creating the circumstances for Azor Ahai's birth, he still killed members of his family and potentially used mind torture and sorcery to do so. Not to mention how he infiltrated Bran Stark's mind without consent, and possibly did the same thing to other protégés. I talked about this in my Euron video. We can thank Bloodraven for Jon Snow, but we can also thank him for whatever morally corrupt actions Bran does as the most powerful Greenseer in the world, like skin-changing and unconsenting Hodor, and maybe even eating Jojen Reed, if you're into that creepy theory. I'll end this video by reminding you that most of this is just a theory, and I'm far from the first to consider Bloodraven's inclination for eugenics. This is not to say, though, that Bloodraven is still pulling all the strings at the current point in A Song of Ice and Fire. If this theory is true, Bloodraven's work in creating the circumstances for Azor Ahai is done, and now his influence really just pertains to Bran. He's not a puppet master, and characters in A Song of Ice and Fire still have their personal agency. However, all the deaths and what we know about prophecy do make for a pretty strong case that Bloodraven either directly or indirectly caused the deaths of several family members. The ends justify his means. The ends are Azor Ahai, and the means were all these blood sacrifices. In the north, as the Three-Eyed Raven, Bloodraven's ends revolve around producing a replacement for himself, a powerful Greenseer to watch over the world through the eyes of weirwoods and other beings. His means were to train students, and one such student became successful in Bran Stark. After all the tampering from Bloodraven and assists from men like Rhaegar, the world may finally see a trio of saviors in Jon Snow, the perfect successor to Azor Ahai, Daenerys Targaryen, the one who succeeded in bringing Aegon's power back into the world where Aegon V failed, and Bran Stark, the boy who sees all. Let me know in the comments what you think about Bloodraven, and whether or not he may have genetically influenced House Targaryen. If you thought the video was interesting, be sure to subscribe for more content in the future. 2022 has been a really fun year on YouTube, and I hope this channel is able to grow even more in 2023. As always, thanks for watching.
And now it begins.
Now it ends.
And who has a better story than Bran the Broken?
He has no interest in such things.